On Tuesday, April 21st, 2026, The Curse of Oak Island returns with Season 13, Episode 23, Island Hopping. And this time, the mystery doesn't stay on Oak Island. It stretches across the Atlantic. It reaches into history. And it raises a question that could change how the team sees everything they've been chasing. In this episode, Marty Lagina helps make a deeply interesting discovery on Lot 8. At the same time, Rick Lagina leads members of the team to the Azores, where they uncover new ties between Oak Island and the Portuguese branch of the Knights Templar. That alone is enough to stop any longtime viewer in their tracks. Because when a physical discovery on the island begins to echo clues found thousands of miles away, the story suddenly gets bigger. Much bigger. So what exactly was found on Lot 8? Why do the Azores matter so much? And could a Portuguese Templar connection finally give structure to one of Oak Island's oldest and most controversial theories? Those are the questions driving this episode from the very first moments. And if the answers begin to line up, then island hopping may become one of the most important turning points of the season. Because what they uncover on both sides of the Atlantic may not just support the legend, it may deepen it. By Season 13, Oak Island is no longer just a local treasure tale. It is a layered investigation built on fragments, wood, stone, metal, maps, symbols, stories, and anomalies that refuse to fit into one simple explanation. For years, the team has worked through clues that seem to come from different times, different people, and possibly even different purposes. Some discoveries hint at engineering. Others suggest travel. Others point toward ritual, secrecy, or belief. That is why this episode feels so important. Island hopping is not built around one isolated dig or one speculative conversation. Instead, it brings together two forms of investigation that Oak Island has always needed: physical work in the ground and historical work in the wider world. On one side, there is Lot 8, where Marty helps examine a discovery important enough to command serious attention. On the other, there is Rick's journey to the Azores, where geography, history, and Old World legacy begin to form a possible bridge between Europe and Nova Scotia. And that combination changes the stakes, because the team is no longer simply asking, "What was found?" They are asking something far more important. Do these clues belong to the same story? That shift is everything. The search expands geographically, but narrows conceptually. Separate threads are no longer being admired on their own. They are being tested against each other, compared, weighed, connected. And when physical evidence on Oak Island starts to meet historical context across the Atlantic, the possibility becomes hard to ignore. Maybe the island's mystery was never only about Oak Island. Maybe the real story has always been larger than the island itself. And as this episode begins to show, sometimes the biggest revelations start with one discovery in the ground. Lot 8 has already earned a reputation as one of the island's most intriguing areas. Earlier in the season, the team had already treated this zone as important, and more recent work only increased that sense. And so when Marty becomes directly involved again here, the tone is clear from the start. This is not routine follow-up. This is a moment the team takes seriously. The description of the episode is brief, but the wording is telling. Marty helps make a deeply interesting discovery on Lot 8. Not just interesting, deeply interesting. In the language of this series, that usually means the find is not being treated as random debris or background noise. It means the discovery appears meaningful enough to raise immediate questions about age, purpose, and connection. And that is where Marty's role matters so much. Marty has always been one of the most practical voices in the search. He is curious, yes. Open-minded, yes. But he also tends to measure excitement against evidence. When someone like Marty is drawn into a discovery, and helps push the investigation forward. It gives the moment extra weight. It suggests that what is being examined is not just emotionally exciting. It may also be analytically important. So imagine the scene. The team is focused. The energy tightens. Something on Lot 8 demands a closer look, not because it confirms a theory outright, but because it refuses to be ignored. It may fit a pattern. It may echo earlier finds. It may suggest that activity on this part of the island was more deliberate than many once believed. That tension is what makes this part of the episode work so well. On one hand, everyone wants the discovery to mean something. Oak Island has taught them to pay attention when unusual evidence appears in a place that keeps producing signals from the past. On the other hand, they know better than to leap too fast. This mystery is famous for baiting certainty and then pulling it away. So the team stands in that familiar but electrifying space between excitement and restraint. What exactly is it? How old could it be? And why does Lot 8 keep refusing to fade into the background? But what happened next changed everything. Because the discovery does not just exist on its own. It lands in a season already leaning harder into older, transatlantic possibilities. Lot 8 has become one of the places where the island seems to whisper that its story may not begin where people once thought it did. It may reach further back. It may involve more players. And it may connect to traditions far beyond Nova Scotia. That is why this moment matters, even before the full implications are understood. The importance is not only in the object, feature, or material itself. It is in the pressure it puts on the larger narrative. A find like this asks the team and the audience to reconsider how the island is mapped in their minds. Not just physically, but historically. What they discovered shocked the entire team, not because it solved the mystery, but because it strengthened the feeling that Lot 8 is part of something much bigger. And by the end of this part of the episode, one thing feels clear. This is not a clue they can casually file away. The discovery on Lot 8 is too compelling, too timely, and possibly too connected to dismiss. What makes the Lot 8 discovery so powerful is not simply that it is interesting. It is that it arrives in a location already charged with significance. Over the course of the season, Lot 8 has repeatedly suggested that Oak Island's most important activity may not have been limited to the areas traditionally dominating the legend. That alone forces a rethink. If this new find is meaningful, and the episode strongly suggests it is, then it may point to concentrated human activity on Lot 8 that deserves to be understood in a broader framework. Not as an isolated curiosity, not as a side plot, but as part of a network of actions that may connect different parts of the island to one another. That possibility matters, because Oak Island has always suffered from a kind of fragmentation. One clue here, one artifact there, one theory in the swamp, another in the money pit. But a discovery like this raises a more mature question. What if these locations were never separate chapters? What if they were part of the same operation? Was Lot 8 used with purpose? Could it connect to earlier unexplained evidence? Could the significance of the island lie not in one spot, but in the relationship between many? Those are the questions this discovery invites. And in Oak Island investigations, context is often more valuable than the object itself. A single find can be dismissed. A pattern cannot be dismissed so easily. That is why Lot 8 matters here. It feels less like a random hit and more like another point on a map that is slowly revealing its hidden design. And just as Marty's side of the investigation gives the team something tangible to examine, Rick's journey offers something equally important: the historical framework that might explain why a place like Lot 8 matters at all. If Marty's storyline is grounded in the earth of Oak Island, Rick's storyline opens outward into the Atlantic world. He leads members of the team to the Azores, a remote Portuguese archipelago with a history shaped by ocean travel, navigation, and strategic position. These islands sit out in the North Atlantic like stepping stones between worlds. Their location alone makes them the kind of place any transatlantic theory would have to take seriously. And that is what gives this trip such dramatic power. The Azores are not just a scenic detour. They are a potential hinge point, a place where old roots, maritime traditions, and historical memory might preserve clues that never survived elsewhere. For Rick, this journey is not about collecting atmosphere. It is about testing whether the story of Oak Island has always had a European dimension more specific and more traceable than many assumed. The mood of this section is crucial. There is expectation in it, mystery in it, a feeling that answers may not come from dramatic artifacts alone, but from symbols, locations, architectural echoes, and the stubborn survival of historical patterns. Rick has always been drawn to meaning, to the connective tissue between clues, to the idea that history sometimes hides in resonance rather than certainty. So he is the perfect guide for a trip like this. He is not only looking for proof, he is looking for coherence. And the Azores offer exactly that possibility. Historically, these islands have mattered because of where they sit. Mid-ocean, strategic, useful to navigators, travelers, and powers trying to move across the Atlantic. That does not prove an Oak Island link, but it gives the search a real historical stage. So as the team explores the Azores, the episode invites viewers to see what they see. Dramatic ocean-facing landscapes, old stone environments, traces of faith and authority, and a maritime setting that feels perfectly suited to hidden movement and forgotten passage. Every angle of the journey seems to ask the same question. If a secret Atlantic corridor existed in the past, would places like this have been part of it? And then the episode pushes deeper, because the Azores are not just about travel, they are about heritage. And what the team begins to uncover there points toward one of the most enduring and provocative names in Oak Island lore, the Knights Templar. This is where island hopping moves from intriguing to genuinely explosive. In the Azores, Rick and the team uncover new ties between Oak Island and the Portuguese sect of the Knights Templar. That phrasing matters. Not random medieval imagery, not vague European mystery. New ties, specific ties, and specifically Portuguese ones. To understand why that is so significant, we need to step back. The Knights Templar were officially dissolved in the early 14th century. But in Portugal, the story did not end the same way it did elsewhere. Instead, the Templar legacy continued through the Order of Christ, an institution closely associated with the continuation of Templar influence in Portugal. In other words, in Portugal, the Templar story did not simply disappear. It evolved. That historical continuity is one reason Templar theories continue to surface in conversations about Atlantic exploration. The Order of Christ became deeply tied to Portuguese expansion. Its famous cross appeared on the sails of Portuguese caravels. Its resources, prestige, and symbolism became linked to the age of maritime discovery. That does not mean every Atlantic mystery traces back to the Templars. But it does mean that when investigators find Portuguese historical threads tied to seafaring, symbols, and Old World networks, they are not operating in pure fantasy. They are working inside a real historical tradition. And that is exactly why the Azores matter here. If Oak Island's mystery contains a Portuguese layer, and that remains a theory, not a conclusion, then the Azores could represent more than a stop on a map. So they could represent a missing waypoint in a much older Atlantic story, a place where maritime roots, religious legacy, and imperial movement intersected in ways later generations forgot. the more they uncovered, the harder it became to ignore the connection. Because what Rick's team appears to find is not just one object or one convenient coincidence. It is the outline of a pattern, a recurring thread, the kind of echo that becomes harder to dismiss the more often it appears. Symbols matter. Geography matters. Institutional legacy matters. Maritime logic matters. And in a mystery like Oak Island, patterns are often more dangerous than proof, because proof can be debated. A pattern can haunt you, and Rick's role in this section is especially important because he has long been the member of the team most willing to follow historical meaning across distance and time. He understands that the island may never yield its secrets if the team only studies what is physically underfoot. Sometimes the real breakthrough comes from identifying the worldview behind the work, the people, the motives, the roots, the belief systems, the habits of secrecy. That is what makes the Portuguese Templar connection so compelling. It offers, at minimum, a framework, a way of thinking about Oak Island, not as an isolated anomaly, but as a destination that may have existed within a larger Atlantic reality. And then, one detail pushes the theory into entirely new territory. Because once the Azores become legible as part of that larger system, the old Oak Island question shifts. It is no longer only, was something hidden here? It becomes, who had the reach, knowledge, and motive to move across the Atlantic and leave traces behind? That is a much bigger question. And suddenly, Marty's discovery on Lot 8 does not feel separate from Rick's historical search at all. It feels like the other half of it. This is the point where the episode title reveals its full meaning. Island hopping is not just about the team traveling from Oak Island to the Azores. It is about ideas moving from one island to another, clues crossing water, historical possibility leaping geography. The episode begins with two separate investigations, but by this stage, those investigations start to reflect each other in striking ways. On Oak Island, Marty helps examine a discovery on Lot 8 that appears too important to ignore. In the Azores, Rick leads a search that uncovers new ties between Oak Island and Portuguese Templar history. Separately, each storyline is compelling. Together, they become something stronger, because neither side fully explains the other. The find on Lot 8 does not automatically prove a Portuguese connection. The Azores material does not automatically explain the discovery on the island, but each one gives the other context, weight, tension, shape. That is what makes this episode work so well as documentary storytelling. It keeps cutting between the tangible and the historical, between evidence in the ground and evidence in the record of Atlantic civilization, between what can be touched and what can be inferred. And with every turn, the same possibility grows larger. Maybe the mystery of Oak Island was never local in scope. Maybe it was always part of a route, a network, or a chain of actions stretching far beyond Nova Scotia. For years, these clues stood apart. Now, they may be pointing in the same direction. And if that direction is real, then Oak Island's story becomes more than a treasure hunt. It becomes a question about movement, of people, symbols, knowledge, and perhaps even protected materials across the ocean. That is why the title feels so precise. Island hopping is what explorers do, what navigators do, what secret carriers might have done. It evokes motion, planning, and stages along a journey. One island is not the end, it is the next point. And in that sense, the episode quietly suggests a transformative idea. Oak Island may not have been the beginning of the story. It may not even have been the center of it. It may have been one stop in a much older and wider chain. That possibility is both thrilling and unsettling, because once you see the clues that way, the map changes, the island changes, even the search changes. and the team begins to confront the idea that they may be uncovering traces of a connected historical network, not just isolated mysteries scattered across one famous shoreline. By the climax of Island Hopping, the episode is no longer asking viewers to choose between field evidence and historical theory. It is showing how the two can intensify each other. Marty's deeply interesting discovery on Lot 8 raises immediate questions about significance, context, and intent. Rick's Azores investigation uncovers new ties to the Portuguese Templar tradition, giving the season one of its boldest historical frameworks yet. Put those two developments together, and the emotional stakes rise fast. Because this is not presented as a final answer. It is presented as something more dangerous to the mystery, a shift in understanding. Suddenly, the search feels remapped. Suddenly, Lot 8 feels less isolated. Suddenly, the Azores feel less distant. And suddenly, the possibility of a transatlantic system behind at least some Oak Island clues does not sound like a fringe leap. It sounds like a hypothesis the team can no longer afford to ignore. This was not just another Oak Island lead. This was a moment that could reframe the entire hunt. That is the true turning point of the episode. Not the certainty of what was found, not the absolute proof of who was involved, but the realization that two very different investigations may be converging on the same underlying idea. An island, another island, a route between them, and a legacy old enough, powerful enough, and secretive enough to leave traces on both. That is the kind of moment Oak Island thrives on. The moment when a clue stops being interesting on its own and starts rearranging the meaning of other clues around it. And as the episode reaches its final stretch, one question hangs over everything. If these connections are real, then what else on Oak Island has been misunderstood simply because the team was looking too narrowly? By the end of Season 13, Episode 23, one thing is undeniable. Island hopping expands the Oak Island mystery in a major way. On Marty's discovery on Lot 8 gives the team another serious reason to believe that area holds more than incidental history. Rick's trip to the Azores adds a powerful historical dimension, uncovering new links to the Portuguese Templar tradition and giving viewers a broader Atlantic lens through which to see the island. The episode does not close the case, far from it, but it does something just as important. It makes the mystery feel larger, more connected, and potentially more coherent than before. The clues are still incomplete, the answers are still out of reach, but the framework is getting stronger. And that is what makes this chapter so compelling. Because if Lot 8 continues to produce meaningful evidence, and if the Azores truly point toward a Portuguese Templar pathway across the Atlantic, then the next phase of the investigation could be enormous. Oak Island remains unresolved, but after island hopping, the search may never look the same again. Because if these links are real, the next discovery could be the one that changes everything. If you want, I can also do one more cleanup pass and make this sound even more like a natural YouTube voiceover by adding stronger transitions, punchier cliffhangers, and more cinematic pacing.